Oh, computer. It's already freezing. Are we live? I have no idea what's happening right now.
I believe we are live. Yes.
We're live. Hey, everybody. My computer's totally frozen here as I hit the button. Good morning, Wrestling Inc. Get up, get going. It is me, your managing editor of WrestlingInc.com. There we go. Now I know I'm live. What an awkward start to the show. Hey, yeah, it's me. It's Nick, and I'm joined here today not by Brian Wool. B-Wo not in the house here today. He's out. He's traveling. Instead, we are graced here today by the one, the only, Alfred Kunawa. Alfred, welcome back to the Wrestling Inc. Daily.
Oh, it's great to be here, Nick. Great to be reunited, and feels very good to be live. And so I'm very looking forward to discussing some of the stuff we have on tap today. And I brought my best shirt just for you.
Oh, I didn't put on my floral shirt. I should have put on a floral shirt. I have floral shirts. That's like the whole thing with us is floral shirts, and I blew it,
Yeah.
Alfred.
No, it's okay. There's enough floral here for both of us, but we'll have future times where we can wear floral shirts together.
Damn it, Alfred. I'm just blowing it here. I'm botching it up top. Reunited, and it feels so good. I'm in a funky mood here this morning, everybody. We're going to have a great show. I got it in my veins. I feel it today. The chat room is open. You guys are more than welcome to join us throughout the show. Let everyone know how you feel. Samantha here. Good afternoon, everybody. Nicholas, my plant friend. Good morning, Nick, and not Brian. We have Alfred in the house here today, to which Nikki Jones, Rothbart, yay, Alfred, Kristen, Alfred, Nicholas. Good morning, Alfred. Wow, the whole chat is lit up for you, Alfred. You know?
Good morning, chat. I love to see it. It's great to everybody's so lively in the morning. I love this energy that we get in the chat in the mornings.
Oh, dude, it's awesome. I have my coffee right here. You know, it was actually sent to me by a listener, Daniel Zamora, who works at a coffee factory. And it's really good coffee, Alfred.
It looks good. I can see the coffee inside the mug, and it looks like looks like a medium roast. Is that what that is?
It is a medium roast. It is not a dark roast. I usually do dark roast, but today, because I got given it for free and I want to try it and it's delicious, I'm drinking medium roast coffee.
I can almost smell it from here.
Yeah, smell it through the sound waves. Well, before we get to all the news, before we get to our latest conversation, before we get to the mailbag, I did want to start the show by congratulating a fellow friend of the show, Joe Dabrowski. He has been hired as the new MLW play-by-play commentator. I don't know if you know Joe or not. He's worked with Ring of Honor. Great guy. Very happy that he has found a home there over at MLW.
Yeah, I know of Joe. He's very talented, and that's great to hear because I love MLW. I'm very friendly with Court Bauer. I think he gets it. I like what he's offering in terms of this is really a true alternative in terms of what his plan is for MLW and a lot of the risks that he takes with that company. And, I saw Fightland and enjoyed it. And that's great news for Joe.
Yeah, awesome news. Great news for MLW. Great news for Joe. Very happy for everybody involved. And I think we're actually going to have Joe on the show here sometime this week or next. So that'll be great to hear from him directly about the move. But without further ado, here's what we got today. Like I said, we got big news for the past 24 hours. Alfred and I are going to chop it up. After that, you're going to hear the latest conversation that we've got for you today. This one came from SummerSlam weekend. Our own Brian Wool was out in the field, and he got to talk with Sheamus. So today you're going to get to hear from Sheamus a little bit as well. That video is already live on the Wrestling Inc. YouTube channel where you can go check that out. And at the end of the show for everybody, we'll dive on into the Wink Daily Mailbag, where I created a very dumb poll today because I just sometimes they're bangers, sometimes they're not. We'll see what kind of conversation we get in the mailbag as we talk about the mini monikers of Roman Reigns, as there's a new one that is making headway right now. But without further ado, Alfred, let's get to it here. News you can use. News that will leave a bruise, and we are in a boxing match here between WWE and AEW this Friday night. We're going to start with a Tony Khan block. Multiple Tony Khan reports the last 24 hours. First of all, Tony announced two big matches for the AEW Rampage buy-in that's going to go head-to-head with the second hour of SmackDown. You will get Bryan Danielson versus Minoru Suzuki and Bobby Fish versus Lee Moriarty. And then on Saturday night, Fish and Danielson are going to have a match on the special Saturday Night Dynamite as well. Thoughts on these two big matches that Tony has rolled out here to go head-to-head with SmackDown, Alfred?
I am conflicted about this because, as somebody who watches wrestling every day and has been following the product my whole life and it has a deep understanding of who Minoru Suzuki is, I'm excited to see Minoru Suzuki and Bryan Danielson. I think in the bubble of professional wrestling, that is something that a lot of people are excited about. I don't know if this is a type of match that's going to draw people away from SmackDown, especially on Fox, especially how more mainstream it is in terms of the context of professional wrestling, because pro wrestling in general really isn't mainstream. But I don't think the Bryan Danielson versus Minoru Suzuki is the type of match that's going to have the desired effect to think of Tony Khan. And I do think this reeks of a little bit desperation from Tony Khan, because you usually do not see AEW become this reactionary, this quick with this short notice. I know that AEW likes to drag on its stories, and when it comes to its big matches, it doesn't like just throwing them up there for the sake of competition. But that's exactly what this is, and it comes on the heels of AEW Rampage doing its worst number ever for 7 consecutive weeks. So between this and some of the comments that Tony Khan's been making of "I can't wait to beat you," and then suddenly it's not competition, and now he's throwing this match up there, it seems like we're getting a desperate side of Tony Khan that we have yet to see. And I think WWE, in terms of doing that half an hour, going head to head with Rampage, commercial free, I think that's a much more effective tactical move in terms of harming AEW. And I don't think this is going to be a move that's going to harm WWE.
Okay, and so wait, is the whole show on Friday on FS1 is all 2.5 hours, or is it like 2 hours on Fox, 1.5 hour on FS1? I'm pretty sure it's all on FS1 this week.
Yeah, I believe it's all on FS1 for 2 hours.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so that does help. I feel, level the playing field quite a bit for that second hour, because, I have multiple times missed SmackDowns that got moved to FS1 because my DVR just doesn't. It's like, oh, no SmackDown tonight. It doesn't. It doesn't recognize it over on FS1. So I do wonder how much it's going to take a hit there. But and I hear you. Like, I don't know how much this is really going to pull away WWE fans, but they're running the play that works best for them, which is we're the victims here, right? We're being hurt by WWE. We all need to get together and fight back against Vince. And in those circumstances, they've traditionally done pretty well. Like, the AEW fans really respond to feeling victimized, Alfred, and feeling like they're being attacked. I do wonder, by throwing what is the Wagyu beef of AEW matches here to them head to head with SmackDown and Danielson versus Suzuki, if it mobilizes everybody. I don't know. I'm as interested as anybody to see how this one plays out on Friday night.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it does, but I mean, this is going to be on YouTube. It's not necessarily going to be on television, so it's not like you're going to have to necessarily change the channel in order to get this match. I mean, I'm going to be covering up both these shows, so I'll have one on YouTube and while I'm watching SmackDown. And I just don't know if this is the type of move that Tony Khan should be making, especially if you think about the fact in terms of going head to head with WWE. They did 500,000 viewers this past week on Rampage, which is not a good number. It's actually pretty scary low. And that 500,000 viewers, if you look at what WWE does on FS1, it's typically around 800,000. I believe the last time they were on FS1, they did 880,000 or whatnot. But there's going to be pretty intense competition, whether it's college football or baseball playoffs. So I'm guessing maybe low 800s, high 700s for WWE. So that means Rampage is going to have to make up about 275,000 viewers in a 1 week span. That's not the type of jump that you make, especially in wrestling, in 1 week. And so I think AEW is really, really staring down the barrel here in terms of being an underdog in this Friday night fight. And I think it could get pretty ugly from them, actually.
Chris Strikeleather here saying, or Stikelether, Danielson versus Nick Jackson did not help with the Rampage ratings. What makes them think that Danielson versus Suzuki is going to do any better? Yeah, I mean, is the luster off, right? I mean, they debuted all these people all at once. There was so much hype. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. I worry that AEW may have blown themselves out. Like, how do you keep up the kind of momentum they had going there for like a month and a half, starting with the Punk return into Bryan, into Adam Cole? It doesn't look like, according to Tony here, that he's had any talks with Bray Wyatt. That's what he told WFAN the other day. And that was really the kind of first time where the synergy between the Sheets and Tony and AEW all kind of got it missed a tick, right? There was an expectation that was put out there that didn't come to fruition. And it's just a lot of moving pieces right now that I feel like are messing with AEW's momentum at the moment.
Yeah, I think AEW made the mistake of thinking that wrestling's on its way back to a boom period. And I know that that's what Tony Khan thinks. He's flat out wrong. I think this time period reminds us so much of the Monday Night Wars, where wrestling was in a boom period, that we forget that wrestling is pretty cold right now. You know, it's not dying or anything like that. From a television standpoint, economically, they're making hundreds of millions of dollars, but that has more to do with a larger picture of the streaming wars and the arms race of people trying to get content and live sports. It's not a reflection of how popular wrestling is. And I think the story of AEW catching up to WWE, the bigger story there is WWE's decline, is the fact that the wrestling industry at large is getting so cold that now there is room for a competitor to eat away at WWE's audience, which is mostly a hardcore audience to this point. And I do not think that AEW and WWE are on their way to becoming like WCW and WWE Nitro, which means I don't think that the wrestling industry supports a secondary company having a second show like Rampage. I mean, I think Rampage has been pretty good in terms of an hour-long show. It's a lot of wrestling, not much storytelling, but I do think it's been good. I just don't think that wrestling fans, in terms of the fan base that's here right now, is going to support a second show for a secondary wrestling company right now. I think Dynamite will be fine. Rampage, I think I'll be very worried about.
Okay, counter. I had Ariel Helwani on Sean Waltman's podcast about a week ago, right? Yeah, Ariel said pro wrestling right now is hotter than MMA. First of all, do you think that statement is true?
I mean, from a week to week, that's an interesting statement, because I can see why he would say something like that. From like week to week, in terms of how wrestling draws viewers, like, and keeps its base, especially when you're looking at wrestling compared to other shows. Like, wrestling does very well on cable. It's got a stronghold on 18 to 49, especially when it comes to SmackDown on Fox. So yes, from that standpoint, yes. But in terms of pay-per-view, in terms of the big matches and the big money matches and the people who are crossover stars, I think UFC has WWE and AEW beat by miles. I mean, you see that when Jorge Masvidal walked onto AEW television with no build or anything, and people went crazy. You never see that with a WWE guy going to UFC. It's like, who's that guy? So it's interesting what you're using in terms of a metric to say that wrestling is hotter, because from a weekly rating standpoint, yes, UFC tried having those UFC on Foxes and they didn't do very well. WWE on Fox is doing just fine, although it's not living up to what they wanted. But in terms of pay-per-view and box office, I mean, John Jones, Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz, UFC's loaded, even Kamaru Usman. UFC's loaded with pay-per-view box office stars that WWE just does not have.
It's a really interesting debate for me, right? Because like, when you talk about how you think pro wrestling is cold right now, like I think it's got to be, I think you got to say it's warmer than it was 5 years ago, right? I mean, the business was dying a death before the pandemic hit, and just before AEW. WWE, a lot of people seem to forget the 6-month period before the pandemic where WWE had stopped doing house shows.
Yeah.
They were only doing TV, and that was not because of a pandemic. That was because nobody's coming to our effing house shows, right? Like, nobody's attending, I think that having AEW in the room has made it's made both products hotter and more interesting, just because even to a casual fan, they're like, well, at least there's some pushback here to WWE right now, and there's some more choices, and there's more to explore, and I think there's an interest there from more casual fans. I think that I'm not satisfied with a lot of what we're getting creatively, and I'll get to the Tony Khan comment about that here right now. But on the number side of it, I mean, SmackDown number one network television 6 weeks in a row or whatever, right? Or two, I think 2 weeks in a row. Before that, it was 6, whatever. AEW Rampage was still the number one show on Friday nights multiple times. It's still, I believe, a top 20 show. For a Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern show to be in that conversation is unheard of, right? I mean, when they went to do the TBS flip, Warner Media was like, by the way, we're going to keep Rampage on TNT because why would you mess with this, right? By their standards, huge success. So that's my only counter to the argument that pro wrestling is cold right now, because I do see there's there's metrics, there's energy there that wasn't there 5 years ago. I just think it's a very different landscape at the moment.
Well, I mean, 5 years ago, the ratings were much, much bigger. And 5 years ago, you had a guy like John Cena. And I will say that I think wrestling is going to be well on its way back to that period where it's now doing house show. We're still living in this honeymoon period where people who have been stuck in the house for the past year want to get back out and get there. But we're already seeing that bloom come off the rose, because if you looked at the attendance numbers for Raw this past week, very scary low. The Rampage numbers, I think it's 1,700 people, and it's coinciding with October, which is the biggest month of sports. So you're getting all kinds of actual sports coming back, and those are really kind of beating the hell out of pro wrestling right now in terms of Major League Baseball playoffs, Monday Night Football, NCAA football. And I think pro wrestling's audience is very loyal. So Rampage is always going to be in the top 5, number 1 or whatnot. Fox, SmackDown on Fox is always going to be number 1 on cable because of that built-in loyalty of the wrestling audience. It's just a matter of how number 1 are you. And I don't think they're getting what they expected in terms of being on Fox, being available to hundreds of millions of homes, and compared to what they were doing on USA, it's essentially the same number, if not more, on USA, which is a smaller network. And I do think that, I know actually that Fox officials are very disappointed with that in terms of just how many viewers are able to come in there and watch. So yes, they're number 1, but it's like a kind of like a token number 1, if that makes sense.
Okay. By the way, our good friend Kevin Kellum in the house here today right now. There is absolutely an elevated sense of desire to deliver something bigger, he is saying right now, that both these companies are pushing themselves. AEW, yes. I don't know about WWE. So that's a good chance to kind of throw in Tony's comments here from Barstool Sports. So he was asked about this upcoming head-to-head, and he decided to throw Raw under the bus. He says, we'll see what happens. I'm not saying for sure we'll win, and maybe the odds are against us in some ways, but we're going to give a better show. I know. If you don't believe me, watch the go-home show they did last night, Monday night, because it sucked. At WrestleTix, reporting Raw took place at the Chase Center in San Francisco, California, was the lowest attended Raw since WWE returned to the road way back on Friday, July 16th. It was noted that the estimated setup capacity for Raw was 4,208 people. The final attendance was 4,031 in an arena that can hold up to 18,000 fans for basketball. That is jarring. And, you know, like I say, with Tony Khan, yes, this is one of the rare times we're seeing Tony kind of react from the hip, you know, and just throw a huge match out there because he's just pissed, right? And wants to counter and make some scene right now. But WWE is not stepping up to this plate right now, in my opinion. I mean, Raw was boring. The biggest thing coming out of Raw was that Ali turned on Mansoor to set up a match at Crown Jewel, which, frankly, the North American audience already has a kind of weird feeling about anyway. You know?
Yeah.
It's really, really bizarre what WWE is doing right now. I have not seen a change. If anything, I feel like there's a petulance there from Vince right now to not do what he did in the 90s and instead stick to his guns and continue to push out the product right now that he wants to be pushing out, Alfred.
I agree. And Raw was flat out bad Monday night. I do agree that the show sucked. I didn't think it was a good show by very many means. And I mean, that was reflected in terms of, you know, the viewership as the show went on. Second hour was pretty good, but it was very low viewership to start. That has a lot to do with the competition they face. But WWE is now boxed itself into a corner. And this is, I don't think anybody is surprised by this based on how they tried to combat the Monday Night Football competition and how they tried to combat the fact that AEW had beaten it in 18-49 2 weeks in a row. In that hot shot, when they started doing that, I'm like, man, you better be careful because you're now setting this unrealistic expectation for what this show is going to be. If you're going to throw on Roman Reigns, if you're going to throw on WWE championship matches, the second you stop doing that, people are not going to have an incentive to tune in. And now we're seeing those chickens start to come home to roost, where people didn't even give Raw a chance, whether it would be good or bad, because they didn't have any blockbuster matches that they announced. It was a regular episode of Raw up against very stiff competition, and it suffered as a result. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, it really wasn't a good show. But in terms of Tony Khan assessing the show in a bad show, that's not necessarily what's going to make a difference in the ratings. And if he's fixated on, we're going to have a better wrestling show, I'm sure AEW Rampage will be probably a better show in terms of wrestling or whatnot. But WWE is doing with SmackDown what they did with Raw to jump their ratings, and that hot-shotting. Hey, we're going to have Brock Lesnar on this show. We're going to have the match that we're building up toward with Naomi and Sonya Deville. We're going to have Becky Lynch versus Sasha Banks. We're going to have all these big matches. Come watch. I think that's going to be very effective regardless of if the show's good or not.
And I think it's little stuff too, you know, because it's just there's no attention to detail anymore, which makes it really difficult to become invested and follow long-term stories. Because like to AEW's credit, like, you know, you can follow a wrestler like their journey, right? Through wins and losses. You can root for them. You can, you know, find a little bit of yourself in them. Very disconnected over on Raw. The thing that was glaring to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the way they framed Shelton Benjamin and Cedric Alexander as a tag team was distanced from Bobby Lashley, right? It was weird to me that, like, after seeing them come to the aid of Lashley like 2 weeks ago wearing Hurt Business shirts, now they're just two guys that are a tag team that have found their way again. Like, I maybe I'm being too minute with my notes here, but like that's a disconnect from. It's a little thing, but it's like, oh, I cared about this, but you obviously don't have the time to follow through on it, and now I don't care anymore, and now you've lost me. And like if you do that dozens of times throughout a 3-hour show, people are just gonna leave, man. You know?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I don't think it's minute, Nick, because they actually pointed this out. I don't think it was even on purpose, but Byron Saxton had some comment during their tag team match, and he's like, wow, I'd really love to know why exactly they're back together. Like he's pretty much unintentionally calling out a big storyline hole that there was no angle in terms of why these guys who we just saw fighting each other a couple of months ago, why are they back together? And Corey Graves, which is the textbook Vince McMahon was probably in his ear, was like, oh, growing pains, just growing pains. That's why. That's the story they're telling. There's no story behind it. Growing pains, like that's insulting the viewer. There is no story. That's why there's a disconnect, is because they're not doing a good job in explaining to me. I have no problem with the Hurt Business being back together. I'm very excited about it, actually.
I think it's great.
The problem is that they split up. They did this big angle to split them up. And then when they needed them to come back together, they just came back together. There was no tease. There was no storyline reason for it. And now, like you said, they're not even on the same page with Bobby Lashley, who could use some movement around him. I love Bobby Lashley. And I actually didn't mind his promo this past week. But now that MVP is out, he could use a couple of guys who are there with him to create some momentum. And they just have not done a good job of explaining that.
Yeah, you know, who doesn't want to watch Goldberg? If you like watching Goldberg hit one spear, why not watch him hit three, right? Yeah. Roll through those guys before getting to Lashley, right? That's like the whole thing with Goldberg is hitting spears. I mean, but that's the kind of things that just like it smacks of just like a petulance to like just do your own thing, to just kind of not have to worry about it and just assume everyone's just going to stay in line, which kind of brings us to NXT last night. You know, a mixed bag. Obviously, well, first of all, we'll start with the big story coming out of it. Carmelo Hayes, your new NXT North American champion. The show saw Hayes cash in his 2021 breakout tournament contract and defeat Isaiah Swerve Scott to capture the strap in the closing minutes. This was right after Swerve had retained over Santos Escobar in the main event. What'd you think of the title change there?
Absolutely loved it. I'd like to issue a slight correction. It is actually now the NXT African-American Championship, as he's become the sixth African-American man to win that title. I like the title went black to black. And it does seem like it was a bit of a swerve for the sake of a swerve, because WWE does like doing that, where, oh, we're all expecting Swerve Scott to lose. He won. You look like an idiot. But it wasn't that. I like how they kind of told the story from beginning to end, to where Swerve Scott didn't have hit row. And so then you see Carmelo Hayes and Trick Williams come to his aid to kind of even the odds. And at the same time, you remember, oh, this guy has a contract, so he turns on Swerve Scott. So I think this was brilliant entrapment. This was actually a case of pretty good storytelling in terms of how you get this title off Swerve Scott. It was exciting in that I expected one thing, and I didn't even think about Carmelo Hayes before he came out to the ring. But when he did, it didn't seem random. It made storyline sense. So I absolutely love this. And I love that WWE made a black top star in NXT in 4 months. I mean, people keep telling me, oh, AEW is only 2 years old. 4 months, this guy comes in, wins the NXT breakout tournament. He gets his diesel. He wins the NXT North American Championship. And this guy's coming off as an absolute stud. And I love to see it.
It is a little weird that AEW does not have a top person of color, at least on the men's side. Like on the women's side, like it seems like much more diverse. You know, you have Japanese women, you have Swole over there. I mean, I don't get it, man. Like it just seems like a lost opportunity for me, because like I see what you tweet, I see what other friends of mine tweet, and like, you know, you could call me a Joe Gacy or whatever. We'll talk about him in just a second. Representation matters. You know, take the words of the progressives and demonize them. But, you know, when you start when you can no longer see yourself in the product or relate to it, you're going to have people fall away. And I do feel like it's a missed opportunity for AEW to not do more to try to create a more diverse roster, because I do think that there are a lot of people that want to see themselves represented in that AEW fold and feel like they're a part of it, but just don't right now, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, they have a diverse roster. They have the talent that's there. It's just a matter of, this is a work sport. This is scripted. All it takes is investment in these talents. They just brought in Leo Rush, who I'm going to actually talk to later on today. And they've got a lot of talent, and they've got the pieces. Dante Martin, they've got the pieces in place to do these kind of things. And, the longer it takes for this to happen, the more I'm going to question, like, well, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, it's a little odd for sure. And that's awesome. You're talking to Leo today?
Yeah, Leo's my guy. I love that guy. But he's they're gonna have a New Japan show, I guess, and we'll talk about his AEW run so far. I really do like the LBO Leo, and I like the potential of him and Top Flight. I think that would be amazing in terms of them as a trios team.
Yeah, I see. Miguel here saying AEW has more Latinos. It's diverse. I will say that it is. Like, WWE seems to have wrapped their heads around like black wrestlers, right? We can make money with black wrestlers. Still seems to be that barrier there for Latin talent over at WWE. I don't know why they just haven't been able to break through on the same level,
Yeah, there's a lot of frustrated. Like, you see what happens with Lucha House Party and whatnot. I will say Damian Priest seems like he's pegged to be their next guy. And if you see how he's being booked, he's never lost a one-on-one match. They put him with Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny is not only one of the biggest Latin artists, and might be the biggest Latin artist, but one of the biggest musical artists, in the world. And so they really got behind him for WrestleMania. So maybe on the surface it might seem like that, but yeah, WWE has kind of lagged behind Latinos, and I do get that pushback in terms of people throwing out Latinos. Like, it's not that I do not care about these other races or whatnot, but I think that there are systems in place for them to be fine. You mentioned the Japanese women that we see in AEW. Right. Well, they have relationships with New Japan Pro Wrestling, with some of these Japanese promotions. AEW has relationships with AAA, with these companies that they can funnel these talent in there, so they'll be just fine. There is no black wrestling company that features predominantly black talent, so they're going to need a little more advocacy. And as a black man who is pro-black, I would be very happy to be one of the voices who talks about this type of thing. So yes, it would be nice to see more Latinos in WWE. I do agree with that sentiment, but I do think that there are systems in place for them to be just fine.
Support AJ Gray and For the Culture.
Yeah.
On the note of there is no black wrestler, there is kind of one, right? I hope FTC becomes like a regular touring thing, kind of like Effie's Big Gay Brunch, but we'll see. So yeah, Carmelo Hayes presented great. I agree with you, man. Awesome storytelling, and it's something that would get me excited if I didn't have to deal with like this Joe Gacy stuff. I'm betwixt because the Joe Gacy as Charles Manson, Harland as his Tex, is not something I necessarily hate, but it just bugs the shit out of me when I watch like Vince take viewpoints or worldviews that he does not agree with and just vilify them as if to say, if you think like this is who you are. You're a crazy, angry, violent person, right? Whereas Tony D'Angelo, actual mobster who has people trapped in his trunk and murders people, right? Good guy, right? Lovable, fun Italian. It's just a weird, warped view for me. And tonight, or last night on NXT, the latest chapter here, he lost to Ciampa. Afterwards, Harland floors Ciampa, holds him down by the throat. Gacy runs over to check on Ciampa. Harland then grabs Gacy by the throat. Harland then receives a "Who are you?" chant at one point from the audience. Then he stares at Gacy while holding Gacy by the throat until Gacy began to slowly caress Harland's face. A disturbed Harland let go and ran away, allowing Gacy to move towards Ciampa to check on him. Ciampa shoved Gacy away and went to the back, leaving Gacy looking up from the ground with a crazy smile on his face. I'll go to you first, Alfred. How did you feel about the Joe Gacy Harland exchange here from NXT?
I felt it was very odd. We'll see if it has promise. I will say this about Joe Gacy. I do feel like it's a layered character. I do like WWE having commentaries on things that are happening right now instead of having any outdated characters. And with the Joe Gacy character, I would have much more of a problem with it if he was this fully fleshed out character that believed things that maybe more progressive people believe. Maybe if the Joe Gacy character was a heel for saying, hey, we need more diversity, we need more representation, and they're making fun of that, saying, haha, or if he was, taking these valid viewpoints that people do have on a certain side of the spectrum, yes, that would be very problematic. However, I do not think that's what this is. I think this character represents, in terms of being layered, like the worst version of somebody who's quote unquote woke, who's maybe trying to take advantage of these viewpoints for their own good, because they do a lot of like cartoon facials with Joe Gacy, where he's this kind of slimy, evil guy. And I don't think the Joe Gacy character cares about these things that he's saying in terms of safe space. I think he's just going to be presented as a big hypocrite. And I think they're trying to paint him as somebody who uses these talking points to better themselves, which is, kind of the worst part of cancel culture, which a lot of people have a problem with, is these people do not care about a progressive and moving the world forward in terms of the worst versions of cancel culture. They're just trying to get people canceled in order for their own good, in order to satisfy their own needs. And I think that's the story they're telling with Joe Gacy, especially now that he's kind of devolved into this weird Harland section of his character.
I guess, like, to me, again, it just kind of, it just feels really tone deaf, especially at a time where you are trying to look cool and get momentum away from AEW. Like, there are a lot of people, I think, that left WWE land to go to AEW because, they probably thought things that Joe Gacy is saying, but, aren't assholes or psycho murderers, right? And, like, right. It's pretty clear to me that's what Vince thinks of those people. And, like, it's a thumb in the eye in a product where you're supposed to be trying to win those people back. And that's why it's just like, earlier when I was talking about a petulance creatively, it's like, I'm going to give you what I think you want and you're going to like it. And that just doesn't fly anymore. Right. Yeah. Like, I think this character is interesting, but like at the same time, I can't ever get past it. It's like they're taking, people that talk about safe spaces, in regards to trauma, like, which is where the whole safe space thing came from. Now you've got this maybe femininity to it here, or maybe he's bisexual or gay, but he's still a bad guy. And is Harland confused by his sexuality with this exchange? And that's why he ran away. It's just weird.
Oh, wow. I didn't think of that angle, but that's very interesting in terms of the bisexuality thing. I think it's just that he's going to be like a Frankenstein character, but we'll see where it comes with that. And I can definitely see where you're coming from, Nick, in terms of feeling that WWE, namely Vince McMahon, who we all know who he voted for, and, WWE donated more money to that former president than anybody else. Maybe not the McMahon family did. So it's easy to take it this way. I think what this character and what this angle needs is a better version of Joe Gacy, maybe a babyface version, or at least a promo from somebody talking about how valid these viewpoints are, but how Joe Gacy is taking advantage of them, so that we can see that WWE actually does have empathy for people who may side with what Joe Gacy is representing. But yeah, for now, if they just have Joe Gacy and that's your only representation of the quote unquote woke left, it's going to be perceived like that. And I can completely understand why a lot of people are perceiving him like that. And that's on WWE and their storytelling.
Let's be real here. Flashback, 14, 15 months or whatever. This is what Retribution was supposed to be, right? Yeah. Retribution was, hey, let's take these people who are advocates and protesting, and we're going to make them bad. We're going to show them as Molotov cocktail throwing monsters, and, present them as somebody wrong and bad. Like, it's just, it's an icky feeling for me, yeah. Alfred, when I just see that kind of consistent drumbeat of demonizing things that seem to be, coming from a good place, right? Yeah, I don't know.
And I will say, though, they were going to do something similar to demonize the alt-right with the Forgotten Sons. If you remember those promos they were doing during the pandemic, those were very pro-America. You stay out of my country, very xenophobic. And they were going to make those guys heels until Jackson Riker worked himself into a shoot and that whole thing blew up. But yeah, they do have a habit of taking that viewpoint and demonizing it because, it's a right-leaning family in terms of Vince McMahon and how he views the world.
I'm not positive the Forgotten Sons were inherently going to be a heel act. I'd have to go back and watch it. I mean, they after look at Riker now. He's wearing the Hulk Hogan red and yellow and going out there acting like a baby face at the moment.
Yeah, but they don't let that guy talk, and they've completely gotten away from that. And I think that's more of a product of his body. But yeah, it is a little problematic that he's wearing the red and yellow after what he said and all that. I think they're just trying to get people talking. And yeah, that is pretty weird that they are having Jackson Riker presented the way he was when he was on TV.
Well, also we got a couple teases for there was. Last night's NXT, how many vignettes were on that show? 10?
Oh, a lot. Yes, that's one of the problems. We talk about NXT 2.0. We have a lot of fun. Tony D'Angelo's the GOAT, as we like to say, in terms of, we kind of have some ironic fun with Tony D'Angelo, but there are a lot of vignettes in terms of NXT and what they're throwing at us. And I think two of the biggest problems in terms of why viewers have tuned out of NXT is they have too much going on. And they don't have enough familiar faces. They don't have enough main roster stars coming to NXT to play those roles of the veterans. If you're going to create this 2.0 product, we're going to create some new stars. You can't do it with the stars that they have in terms of we're going to put them over Tommaso Ciampa or whatnot. Yeah, that's fine. But if you really want them to be stars and have your main roster kind of recognize them as such, you're going to need the Jeff Hardys of the world, the Cesaros of the world, come down to NXT and work with these guys.
Yeah, there were a lot of matches last night where I was just like, I don't really know who these people are quite yet. Like there's a lack of depth there at the moment. And I understand these vignettes are to try to establish these new characters. So in the long run, you can tell these stories. And I understand that. But it just is really jarring right now how like little investment I have in the characters that are all very surface level, it would seem largely in NXT at the moment. So with that said, two new characters coming. First of all, there was a teaser vignette for a new mystery superstar debuting at Halloween Havoc. The video featured a person digging into the ground with a shovel saying, "I will bury the past so I can start again." Any inkling who you think this one could be, Alfred?
Yeah, it definitely sounds like Elias. I mean, this is what he was doing on the main roster before he disappeared. And burying the past sounds like what he wanted to do with the old Elias characters. He's going to kill the old Elias. There's going to be a new Elias. And then they just kind of put that on ice. But I do think that this is now going to be Elias coming back to NXT, which I think would help.
I see Christopher Steichleather here and Dave in saying, what about, was that Dakota Kai? It looked more fit. It looked the silhouette looked more feminine to me. So unless they're swerving, it didn't look like a big jacked up Elias, right? Dakota Kai, I think could make sense. Sure. Or
she didn't get drafted, which is very surprising because I know they were trying her out and she hadn't appeared on NXT television. So she's definitely a candidate, but I do think this might be a case of them using a feminine figure to be like, we got you.
Swerve. Okay, for sure. I thought Mia Yim was somebody in the back of my mind. I know she got drafted to Raw, but what does that mean? Right. Yeah. And then also we got a vignette, a coming soon teaser vignette for a new superstar named Solo Sikoa. Sikoa is the younger brother of the Usos and the younger son of Rikishi. I like the vignette. It'd be nice to see him in the mix as well. But I'm ready for an episode that is, a lot less vignette-y and a lot more in-ring storytelling right now, Alfred.
I think we're going to get that with Halloween Havoc. And that's another thing that this NXT 2.0 was missing, in that they didn't have anything to build to for the first couple of weeks. So it just seemed like they were doing all this random stuff with vignettes with no clear direction. And with Halloween Havoc, you're going to get the matches. You're going to get more in ring. And I think that's going to really help the show in terms of being this big show that they're building toward in terms of viewership.
All right, lastly here before we get to Sheamus, and then we'll dive into the mailbag. Post-wrestling with a transcription here from a WrestleFest signing Q&A with Jerry the King Lawler, where he was, and by the way, props to whoever asked Jerry about this. Got a set of cojones on you here. Asked him about the infamous ramen noodle moonsault call that he did during an Akira Tozawa match on Raw. So I'll try to read this. It's a longer than usual quote, but I wanted to make sure that the context was not lost in what Jerry was saying here. So he says, then one day I'm doing Raw and Tozawa is in the match. Tozawa does some kind of move, and then we're on live. You got to remember we're on live. And now Byron says, oh, there it is, the spinning dragon something. And I'm just like, oh, you just made that up. And so the next thing, he goes to the top of the rope. He flies off. And I looked at Byron and I said, oh, look, there's a ramen noodle moonsault. What's racist about that? I thought it was funny. That's a ridiculous name, right? All of a sudden, the internet blows up. Oh, King's a racist. Even Tozawa the next day, even Tozawa the next week comes back and he says, it's nothing racist. I eat ramen noodles every week. Did he? First of all, I didn't take the time to find out if Tozawa actually said that. But anyway.
I think he did. I think he tweeted it.
Okay, great, wonderful. But the next week, I wasn't on Raw anymore, so I don't know if that's what happened. But anyway, you got to be very careful. So I should probably not say Mr. Fuji with an accent. God.
Oh, man.
Unrepentant Alfred here, right? You all are the problem for being upset. What I said was hilarious.
Yeah, Jerry Lawler is doubling down. I do not view Jerry Lawler as a racist, but I do get frustrated that he might not see the error of his ways in terms of him doubling down like this. There was a similar controversy where a baseball announcer got in trouble because Shohei Ohtani, who's one of the rising stars in the Angels, he's a Japanese piece, the next Babe Ruth, really. And he's become a really big star in baseball because of his style of play and how exciting he is. But he's Japanese. He doesn't speak very good English. And an announcer said in a Japanese accent, very, very careful. And he was kind of mocking Japanese people. And he got in a lot of trouble for that. And this is along the alley of what Jerry Lawler got in trouble for. And WWE does not like controversies like that. And they saw that Jerry Lawler, and this is not the only kind of old school thing he has in terms of some of these outdated terms he says. Jim Cornette went through the same problem with NWA, where he says things that are maybe they would have flown when he was in the 80s or in Mid-South, but these aren't things that you can say now. I'm not a fan of people losing their livelihood because of something they say and the overreaction or whatnot. But I do think that there needs to be, at the same time, an empathy, and you need to update your language because that is not something that's going to fly if you're going to be commentating like that in modern day pro wrestling.
All right, Alfred. Well, thank you for talking all of the news the past 24 hours with me. What a bag of news we had here today. Tony Khan, by the way, just keep talking. Paying our bills.
Yes.
Good job. Just keep saying things, radio shows, tweets. Just keep them coming, buddy. So thank you very much, by the way, to Brian Wool and Sheamus as well, and to WWE for the time we were given during SummerSlam weekend to talk with all those superstars. And with that, we'll dive into the mailbag. Today's mailbag question, like all of our mailbag questions, comes from @Wink Daily, WINC Daily. That's the account to follow. We're at 1,306 followers. We could hit 1,307 followers if you follow us. And I don't know if you know this or not, but 1,307 is actually my favorite number. And wow. I know you could be that lucky person to be 1,307, my favorite number. So go do it now if you want to be that person. If you don't, that's fine too. Anyway, so today's poll question stems from this new filing from WWE. They filed for the trademark to the suplex or cyst with a dash, or the suplexorcist, no dash. That was on October 8th. It's the new nickname of Paul Heyman's been giving Roman Reigns during promos to hype the feud with Brock Lesnar. So I asked everybody, what's your preferred moniker for Roman Reigns, since he has multiple now? Is it the Tribal Chief, the suplexorcist, the Big Dog, or something else? With over 200 votes, 76.4 Tribal Chief, 9.6 yes. Suplexorcist, 7.7 Big Dog, 6.3 other. I think we have, I don't know if this is Roman Reigns' final form. I don't know how much longer he's going to exist in pro wrestling on a regular basis, because he does seem to be getting a lot of momentum at the moment. But I think Tribal Chief, that's the moniker that will probably be with him for the entirety of his pro wrestling career, Alfred.
Yeah, Tribal Chief is definitely the best. I really do love the poll. I love some of the responses, especially the write-in responses, some of which we can't repeat. But that's a very fun poll that I've seen on Twitter. And Tribal Chief is the best because it's easiest to chant. It's just such a quick, small package type of name, and it has a lot of punch to it. I'm surprised there hasn't been a Tribal Chief chant that's popularized yet. They seem to be wanting to chant Roman instead of the Tribal Chief, which I think is a much easier thing to chant, and you can have a lot more fun with something like that. But I also just love that name. It's just a badass name that really tells you everything you need to know about Roman Reigns at the moment.
Yeah. Dave in, Tribal Chief, easy. Samantha, hey, he's my Tribal Chief ahead of my table, or the head of my table, I think. Daniel Price, I'll admit that when I heard Suplexorcist, it made me chuckle. Heyman should bronze that one. I do like I like Suplexorcist for the moment. It is a bit of a word garble, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Bit of a word garble. I think we'll get those Tribal Chief chants, though, man. Like the moment that Roman Reigns stops the Usos from murdering Sasha Banks or whatever it may be, the pop in that place when he goes back to being a babyface is going to be ridiculous. How long do you think they keep him as a top heel like this, Alfred?
I mean, they can keep him as a top heel like this for as long as they want because he's really selling a lot of merchandise as a heel. So unless they get greedy and say, well, think about what he can do as a babyface, maybe sometime next year. But I think it's an if it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing where I do not think this is getting stale in terms of Roman Reigns. I think the only hole in the game in terms of the Roman Reigns being the top star is they're not doing a good enough job with his challengers. Yes, you'll get a Brock Lesnar coming every now and then or an Edge or somebody from the past who can be his equal, but I don't think they're doing as good of a job with the Kevin Owens, who's still recovering from his feud with Roman Reigns, or the Finn Balor's who had that terrible thing with the ring rope, or even Bryan Danielson when he went into facing Roman Reigns. They don't do a good job of creating momentum that they could possibly beat Roman Reigns. But this Roman Reigns character, I think, has been phenomenal, and I like what they're doing with him. But I do think within the next year, he'll be a babyface. I think following WrestleMania 38, whatever happens with Brock Lesnar, I think eventually Paul Heyman will be the one to turn on Roman Reigns, and then we're going to get babyface Roman Reigns.
You think Paul turns on Roman at Crown Jewel, or you think they hold off on it?
Oh, they hold off. I think at WrestleMania, that's the thing that they're going to go with.
That's the way. I mean, it's like I would like to believe that, but they just act like they get out in the sands in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, and they just here's an extra $1 million cash. We'd really like Brock Lesnar to win this match. Sold. I don't know. It's just how, it's just the way it seems to work over there,
Yeah.
So
yeah, anything can happen. Yeah, I'm expecting anything in terms of that match. I could definitely see something like that.
Oh man. By the way, Rob Humphrey here with the last comment. Is Tony D'Angelo going to call his finisher the Gabagooplex?
We heard that on NXT, but that's a great name for a finisher, the Gabagooplex. I really do hope he does that. That's hilarious.
Well, Gabagoo. All right. All you Sopranos fans out there. Well, that'll bring us to the end of the show today. Alfred, it was wonderful having you here. Hopefully we can get you back and we'll talk some more wrestling news down the road. But come back tomorrow, everybody. I'll be joined by Paul Pratt, a.k.a. Polio Del Mar. Also on the show, our own Scott Fishman. He had a chance to catch up with QT Marshall. Arguably, I think maybe like top 3 heel in AEW. I mean, everybody loves everybody in AEW. There's only one man all of AEW seems to really hate, and that's QT Marshall. I think that's fair to say, right?
That's very fair to say. I love me some QT Marshall as a character. He gets it, QT Marshall, and he does a good job at being a heel, not like a cool heel, but somebody who actually gets booed. And I just love his promos. I think he's a very underrated promo in terms of how he comes off as a heel. He does a very good job.
Just while we're saying nice things about QT, he's really found himself, and I feel like he's still finding himself. Like we talk about how Roman Reigns in his final form here is Tribal Chief. We're building to something here with QT. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know that we're there yet, but there's going to be something that he does that just clicks, and I think people stop ragging on him just as like Tony Khan's assistant and Cody's buddy. I really think he's going to prove himself on his own in a meaningful way here, maybe sooner than later. So, yeah. All right.
Well, maybe that might be it. Maybe some art imitating life and that he becomes the Stooge character. But we'll see what they do to get people to connect and really kind of put this guy over as a top heel, if that is in the cards for QT.
Alfred called him a Stooge, not me.
I said Stooge character. It's a work.
Okay, sorry. So QT and Scott will be here tomorrow. Like I said, me and Paul. If you like the Wrestling Inc. Daily, support WrestlingInc.com. We're on all your favorite social media platforms. And, of course, the Wrestling Inc. podcast goes live at night. It's a lot like this. Sometimes you can see Alfred, Justin LeBar, Issa, Raj, Jack Farmer, all those faces at night, just like this show. The comment section is live, including there's no post-show tonight because Dynamite's not happening tonight.
Right,
so,
no Dynamite.
So you're going to have to wait till Friday for the big action-packed SmackDown Rampage doubleheader post-show. Then I believe Saturday we might have a post-show for Dynamite. I don't know. I haven't talked to Raj about it. But then, of course, Saturday night as well, if you want to tune into Fight.tv, I'll be doing the commentary for Warrior Wrestling alongside Rich Bikini. Bret the Hitman Hart's going to be part of the show. It's going to be a slam banger and a half, and all you guys can check all of that stuff out. Alfred, what do you want to plug, promote, put over here to wrap up the show today?
Follow me on Twitter at This Is Nasty, YouTube Pro Wrestling Bits. I will have an interview with Leo Rush tomorrow, probably putting it out on Friday. We're going to talk today. So be on the lookout for that for Forbes. We're going to have a very good time. And thank you guys for hanging out with us.
Absolutely. I'm at Nick_Hausman over on Twitter. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And remember, if you winked, you didn't miss it.